Our chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, joins me now. You just heard Senator Cotton say it. Weeks. What does that mean?
Well, President Trump said a massive and ongoing operation. He said that on that recorded message given to the public. That's the only information given to the public. Or I should add, J.D. Vance, the vice president, gave an interview to the Washington Post saying the U.S. wouldn't be in a sustained war in the Middle East. There are a lot of questions, and we see that in our polling, Major. But in terms of what our allies in the region are seeing and hearing, I've been making calls all day, and what I'm being told is this is swiftly becoming a regional conflict. This was a decision made by the U.S. and Israel to bomb Iran, and it was against the wishes of all of those allies who are now getting hit with drones and with missiles. All those Arab partners said, do not do this. We really prefer diplomacy. They didn't want to be part of this fight, and now they are. And you are getting those signals from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that they will have to retaliate. Iran targeted civilian areas.
So does that change their calculus now that they're in on this? Now they are joining in a somewhat collaborative way with the United States and Israel because they now have to.
Well, there's a defensive action, there's retaliation, right? But then there are very significant questions, the questions you and I have. Look, there are 40,000 U.S. military personnel throughout the Middle East. These countries that are now getting targeted are getting targeted because they host Americans there. But Iran chose not just to target bases, but to also hit civilian areas. Some of those missiles were intercepted because of that strong defense presence we have, but it is provoking and drawing in and broadening the regional conflict. That doesn't necessarily mean these countries want to do more than defend and be vocal about it, though. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of questions about are that call President Trump made in that recorded statement at the end, where he called on the Iranian people to rise up. And the questions I'm getting are, with what weapons and with what ground force? Because at this point, all we know about is that this is an aerial-only campaign. How do the people who the president says were just slaughtered en masse within days, 32,000 of them, suddenly have the ability to topple the regime without weapons to do so, right? So there are questions about that. A lot of skepticism and a lot of history here, Major, about that idea of regime change. That is deeply uncomfortable in this region. In a region where, admittedly, a lot of these governments aren't democratic themselves. And so when they hear regime change, they haven't been given intelligence, they haven't been given briefings, and instead they are seeing a war of choice on the part of Israel and the United States. I know Senator Cotton says, oh, we had to do it. They are feeling a lot of concern about where this is headed next.
Remind our audience, Margaret, of what you discussed with the Omani foreign minister yesterday in advance of Face the Nation, because it sounded to me as if there was an expression from that Omani foreign minister who's got pretty good insight into this negotiating process, Iran-U.S., that the Iranians were moving in the United States direction, at least in terms of future nuclear ambitions.
Well, Oman was acting as that neutral mediator to try to broker a deal, and that was clearly a Hail Mary pass, right, as we would call it, coming to talk about, look, we are close to a deal. Remember, it was February 19th, President Trump stood up there and said to the world, I'll take 10 to 15 days to decide whether to bomb or whether to go with the diplomacy. There were active talks underway. There were plans on Monday and Friday to have more meetings, but clearly in that meeting with J.D. Vance, the Omani foreign minister walked away with the impression that the United States was not fully behind the diplomacy. And that is also causing deep questions, because this would be the second time that the Trump administration has decided to bomb Iran while in the midst of ongoing diplomacy. And that undercuts the credibility. Now, was that diplomacy genuine on behalf of Iran? Deep skepticism there. Was it on the part of the United States when the president sent two people who were very new to this file, who are not nuclear scientists, not intelligence experts, not diplomats, to spend just 6 hours on Thursday talking about this? Can you really get a deal? You know, the president may have been genuine in his desire for a deal, but preparing with the tools and the way to get there is the point that I'm hearing raised here. Is if you really wanted this, you surge resources. You don't send two people who are talking to the Iranians in between meetings with the Ukrainians and in between business deals, since Jared Kushner does not officially work for the United States government. If you want diplomacy to work, you got to set the stage for it. Now, we are hearing there are at least technical talks at the IAEA on Monday.
Right. I was just advised, Margaret, that a statement has been released by Central Command saying the following: no injuries, no deaths of U.S. military personnel as a result of this action, and no significant or even nominal damage to U.S. military facilities in the region thus far. That's first contact. That's promising. But as the president said in his video message, Americans ought to be prepared for the possibility of U.S. military casualties.
You know, Major, that particular line was breathtaking to me from President Trump: prepare for casualties. If this is an aerial-only war, what does that mean? Which casualties? Are there special forces that are going to be on the ground? Are they going to, or are they anticipating that our naval ships are going to be targeted?
Which is what I was trying to get at with Senator Cotton. Of course, he couldn't answer, but there's something there that the president's trying to alert us to.
Exactly. I have so many questions, and I would love for the administration to come out and answer them. And I'm sure a lot of those military families have questions about exactly how long their loved ones are going to be there in this sustained operation that Cotton just described to you. But there are so many questions here, and that is where, as the American president, if he feels that there was this imminent threat, describe the why. What was the imminent threat? Tom Cotton said to you, the senator who chairs the Intelligence Committee, so he is briefed, that there were immediate threats related to ballistic missiles. Well, for the public, what the public can do, and they can Google it themselves, is pull up the Defense Intelligence Assessment that says that Iran couldn't hit the United States for another 9 years with a missile, which is true. If he knows something the public doesn't, maybe they should read us in on that. You know, that's where we're going to see some real, I think, questioning in the next few days, perhaps in the next 24 hours. But right now, it's not being shared with our allies or with Congress, and not with the United Nations. And right now, it is full on without bringing any of those parties along, which means for President Trump, this is a massive gamble. And God help us. Let's hope there are no casualties. Let's hope the CENTCOM can keep issuing statements like that.
Margaret Brennan, brilliant stuff as always. I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who joins us from the White House. Weij, pick it up from there.
Well, Major, at this hour, President Trump is not here at the White House. He's down at his resort Mar-a-Lago in Florida, surrounded by some members of his national security team. And we are told they are closely monitoring the situation, as, of course, was the case last night when a source familiar with how things went down tells us that the vice president, Secretaries Wright and Bessent, and the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, were watching the strikes unfold from the Situation Room here, and they were dialed into a line with President Trump and the team in Florida. Now, Major, what we do not know is whether Trump will make any remarks today. So far, we have not heard directly from him since he announced this attack on Iran overnight. And perhaps the video for now will stand for itself because, as you and Margaret were just talking about, it is so remarkable to hear the president calling for regime change explicitly, which is typically against U.S. policy, and to have such a stark and chilling warning about the potential for American casualties. And thirdly, what struck me was his direct message to the Iranian people, which you also talked about. And I think that's really important, Major, to mention, because that is what started the bubbling of this potential second strike right after the new year. The president sent a message about the deadly protests in Iran, and he had a warning that we are locked and loaded and ready to go if they continue. And that's sort of what sparked the conversation about another strike, Major. Of course, now the conversation has shifted to whether Iran is rebuilding its nuclear capabilities and what evidence there may be that they have already started to do that. But remember that the protests is what triggered the president to really become angry in early January about this. So we are waiting to see if he says anything more, Major. But again, we are still studying that remarkable video that he posted from Mar-a-Lago.
Weijia, before I let you go, just to remind our audience, the president was very emphatic, repetitively so last summer, about what happened when the United States followed on Israeli aerial attacks on nuclear facilities within Iran, saying they were obliterated. For those in our audience who might say, well, wait a minute, if they were obliterated, why do we need to go back? Based on what you've heard for the last couple of weeks, can you fill in some of the blanks there, at least from the administration perspective?
I wish I had more to fill in, Major, but that really is an outstanding question that this administration has struggled to answer, because the president put himself in that corner by declaring essentially a victory with Operation Midnight Hammer last fall, saying that the U.S. was able to essentially obliterate, his word, not mine, Iran's nuclear ambitions and the 3 facilities. And of course, we also know that those strikes took out top scientists that are required to continue building that program, and top leaders. So after that was done, the president was very clear in declaring a win. And so that took decades to build, right? And here we are just several months later. How can you rebuild in such a way that that merits what we are seeing unfold right now, this sort of attack in its size and scope? So it only begs the question further, Major, about what happened during the last attack. Why was there so much left? And I have to tell you, President Trump has answered this himself, or tried to, and he said that there was dust left. But what we are seeing now, clearly it was more than dust that was left over, and that's something we don't know in terms of, you know, what is there that they are trying to take out. But to your point, it is a question that will continue to be asked, especially by Americans who are still wondering, perhaps, right now, why the size of this attack is necessary.